All right, excellent. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another EBFA webinar where we are going to be exploring about brain, breath, and barefoot. So as soon as I say those three words, brain, breath, barefoot, I hope that you are starting to think about sensory stimulation, which you know is something that I absolutely love to talk about. It is important to us at EBFA as well as to us at Naboso. If this is your first time tuning into a webinar with me personally, I am Dr. Emily, functional podiatrist, human movement specialist, founder of EBFA Global, and CEO of Naboso. We are going to jump on into that. Also, we like to establish that this is our 10 years. We have 10 years technically. Last year would have been, I need to update that. 10 years plus 12 years, getting old, my goodness, 10 years as leaders in barefoot education. EBFA was launched in 2010, and our Barefoot Training Specialist Level 1 was actually launched in 2012. So we are hitting the 10-year anniversary on that. Everything continuously evolves for EBFA. We are much more than just a foot-focused education company. We are focusing on the full sensory experience and how it interconnects with the rest of the body. Hence, this brain, breath, barefoot evolution. We believe at Naboso and EBFA that life is sensory. Life is sensory, movement is sensory, and movement is life. Now, when we think about this brain, breath, barefoot, I want you to think about it as the integration of the nervous system. Nervous system is going to be represented by the brain, and the processing of sensory stimulation, both interoceptively, internally, which is going to be represented through our breath, as well as exteroceptively, which will be represented through the word barefoot, even though it is much more than just barefoot. We obviously have other aspects of our skin, our joints are also going to be exteroceptive. And that is really what we build into our BTS Level 1 certification. For anyone who is listening and you may actually be BTS certified, then congratulations. If it's been a while since you've taken the course, you may want to audit it and take it again because we update it every 2 years. So if it's been a while, just know that that's an option. If it's something that you've been looking at, then know that we teach that both in person and live. The live one, sorry, that doesn't make sense. In person and online. Sorry. The online one is on our Teachable platform. So that is ebfaglobal.teachable.com. And it also links off of our main website. Okay, so let's get on into it. Let's start with our sensory perception, both exteroceptively and interoceptively. Exteroception, interoception. If you've never heard these words, write it down. Understand that difference. We're going to start with exteroception. Exteroception is going to be how our exteroceptors or sensory nerves connect us and relate us to the external world, which is then translated through our movement. Okay. Interoception and interoceptors are found in our internal system. They're really found within our visceral system, our gut, your interorgan fascia that's kind of connecting everything. Interoception is how we connect to our internal environment, and that is going to be translated through our breath. So oftentimes the way that we move is, again, that representation of our external relationship with ourselves and the world. Interoception, the way that we breathe, is going to be that representation of our internal environment and how we relate that externally. Of course, you know that these are going to relate, right? So exteroception and interoception can influence each other. If you are not breathing the right way, it's going to influence your stability, which will ultimately affect the way that you move. So you can start to see how that's connected. Okay, our feet are exteroceptive, right? So exteroceptive, special nerves that connect us to the external world. When we think about walking, the sensory driver of walking, right? It is a sensory experience. Your feet are contacting the ground. Really, the only contact between the body and the ground when we walk is the bottom of the feet, but the bottom of the feet specifically. And that sensory side of the foot-ground relationship is going to be our sensory driver to walking. Now, I want to just take a pause for a minute over here. The sensory driver to posture would be what? The sensory driver to posture would actually be gravity. So gravity coming down, this weight or pressure on our shoulders coming down is the sensory driver or trigger to postural muscles and postural fascial tensegrity. The sensory driver to walking is going to involve foot-ground interactions, which is going to be ground reaction forces, right? Ground reaction forces. One thing I do want you to understand is that as your leg swings forward to take a step, there is actually this period of free fall and acceleration as your foot is about to hit the ground because gravity is coming down with you as well. Now, these ground reaction forces or impact forces, oftentimes associated from a negative context, all the cushioned supportive running shoe companies want us to think about impact as bad and as the cause of injuries and stress fractures and plantar fasciitis, but we want to think about impact forces as our body's potential energy. So it is our gift from gravity in the ground. And ultimately, when I see patients, I am seeing them and understanding the relationship that they have with the ground and the gravity. Most people actually fight the ground. They're not tuned in, they're not in harmony with, they're not one with the ground and the impact forces. They're very disconnected, they're reactive, they're slower, they're just not working together. People like that start to experience overstress, inefficiency, obviously injuries and compensation. So we always want to be thinking about walking or movement, impact forces, potential energy in this positive context that we as the movement specialists need to optimize for our clients, patients, and athletes. These are just a few numbers to help you understand that level of impact forces. When we walk, your heel strikes, you're experiencing 1 and 1.5 times your body weight in impact. Your body absorbs it. By the time you get into a lever position or the ball of your foot to push off and take a step, you're actually releasing 2.5 times your body weight, which is an interesting fact. You're getting this doubling response. I'll reference that again shortly. When we run, whether we're a heel striker or a midfoot striker, you are experiencing 3 to 4 times your body weight in impact. You're storing it in your body. And then when you release it and you take your next step, you are releasing 5 to 6 times your body weight in impact. So that doubling, right? Do you see energy in versus energy out? The energy out is higher. It's actually double or almost double what was coming in. The ability to double the potential energy is based off of your ability to convert potential energy into elastic energy. That's what this slide is representing. Okay. Now, the conversion of potential energy to elastic energy is hidden within our fascia. Okay, your myofascial web. Now, why fascia is so important in human movement, especially as it relates to brain, breath, barefoot, is that there are over 100 million sensory nerves within our fascia. So I consider the fascia as an extension of our brain. It is sensory seeking. It wants to connect to movement, right? It is feeling those impact forces as well, just like your feet are, okay? Your fascia is packed with exteroceptors as well as interoceptors, but we're going to talk about the exteroceptors first. Now, the exteroceptors that we are going to find within our fascial system and in our skin are proprioceptors and mechanoceptors. Okay. Now, if you listen to a lot of EBFA stuff, this is going to be totally of a repeat. So just humor me for a moment, or I invite you to just kind of say like, yes, I could actually say this. It's the repetition of hearing it again that you are now becoming a master of exteroception and that concept. All right. So proprioceptors, some of the most common proprioceptors, muscle spindles, GTOs. These are nerves that are found in your muscle tendons, your joint capsule, your ligaments, your myofascial web. They are typically found or heavily found around your joints. So they help in the detection of joint position sense, how your joint wobbles and then creates a stimulus to the proprioceptors to then create a stabilization response. Take an ankle sprain as the easiest example. To control an ankle is to control any shift or perturbation, wobble in the ankle to trigger proprioceptors and then activate the peroneals, in this case, to stabilize the ankle. That's a proprioceptive response. Proprioceptive training tools include wobble boards, BOSU, Dynadisc. Technically, we also stimulate our proprioceptors when we contract our muscles. So by lifting heavy things, doing like a farmer's walk, or a suitcase carry or something like that, is stimulating your proprioceptors. Using wrist weights, weighted vests, compression apparel, using a weighted blanket when you sleep. All of those are proprioceptive. Gravity stimulates proprioceptors. Okay. Okay, great. Mechanoceptors. Now, this on the other side is going to be a little bit different. Mechanoceptors, instead of being muscle spindles and GTOs, we've got Merkel disc, Ruffini-Endine, Meissner corpuscles, Pacinian corpuscles. We have slow adapting and fast adapting mechanoceptors, and you can see the different stimuli that they are sensitive to. The SA1 Merkel disc 2-point discrimination is Naboso. So all of the Naboso products are essentially 2-point discrimination stimuli. The SA2 is stimulated by skin stretch. The Ruffini-Endines you find not only in your hands and your feet, but also in your fascia, your myofascial web. So when you get a massage, you are actually stimulating the Ruffini-Endines within the fascial tissue, and it has been shown to downregulate the autonomic nervous system into a parasympathetic state. So it's a fun fact. The Meissner corpuscles and Pacinian corpuscles are sensitive to vibration. So both of them, low frequency and high frequency vibration. Okay, so both mechanoceptors and proprioceptors are used to connect to your movement and stabilize against that dynamic movement. Okay, now we understand that impact forces are our body's potential energy. We are able to double the potential energy in our body by becoming elastic energy, and that happens within our fascial tissue. Okay, the stimuli of impact forces that becomes potential energy is vibration. So every time your foot strikes the ground, you are experiencing vibrations. Foot strike ground, vibration. Vibration stimulates the corpuscles in the bottom of the feet, and you also find corpuscles in your myofascial web. Okay, so that's the connection between ground, foot, nervous system, fascia. Okay, that's what's happening. Okay, now vibration is our body's potential energy, but it needs to be stored in our connective tissue. How do we get the vibration from the ground into our fascia? Which is the exact same question as if I said, how do we absorb impact, or how do we damp impact forces? Okay. If I had a tuning fork, which I'm in my podiatry office, I should have totally grabbed it somewhere in my drawer, my tuning fork. But let's say I take a tuning fork and it's vibrating. Hey, the tuning fork is vibrating. How do I stop that tuning fork from vibrating? I'm going to touch it, right? So the touching of the tuning fork is going to be representative of a contracture or a stiffening around your lower leg to stop the vibration coming in. Now, when you damp the vibration coming in by contracting your muscles, you stiffen your fascia, and it technically potentiates your fascia. Okay. Now, if this is your first time hearing this, just take it in, and listen to this again. Okay. This is called the muscle tuning theory. Essentially, it's saying that in order to absorb vibration and store it as potential into elastic energy, we have to contract our muscles and tension or stiffen our fascia. That's really what it's saying. Okay. Now, what happens when you wear footwear that has cushion in it is that the cushion of the shoe absorbs the vibration, and then the skin mechanoceptors don't perceive it, and the loading response is not taken up by the body, but the shoe does it. Now, if the shoe damps the vibration, you don't get as much potential energy stored within your fascia. Okay, which means you have less elastic energy. When I look at runners as an example, and I think about fascial elasticity and running efficiency, I need them to be connected to the ground, their feet, their fascia, and the nerves. If the shoe is absorbing the impact and the potential energy, then they will always be inherently less efficient, which means they're not accessing as much potential of their potential as they could. So typically a shod environment is going to be associated with being delayed, reactive. I consider it an energy leak, less efficient, sensorily disconnected, right? So that's where we want to make sure that we are staying connected to the feet, to the nerves of the feet, to the fascial system. And then the other super awesome part is that the fascia in your feet connects to the fascia in your core. So you are able to access what is called foot to core stability. And that foot to core stability is one of the foundational concepts of EBFA, right? Your feet are really powerful from a sensory perspective, and then from a small muscle perspective. So you need to have the foot's core, so the core of your foot, connecting to the core of your body, if that makes sense, right? So that foot core connection is fascially based. Fascial connections are sensory based. Okay, again, hopefully this is connecting that brain breath side of it. Okay, now where we bring our breath into this, okay, is that the way we breathe is ultimately going to influence our movement stability, because the diaphragm is connected to the pelvic floor. Go back here one more time, right? You can see your pelvic floor myofascially blends into your diaphragm. So if I'm not breathing effectively, which we'll go into some reasons why, then the deep core muscles are not going to be as optimized, and then therefore the foot cannot be as optimized. So this transfer of potential energy into elastic energy from the ground starts to unravel a little bit if either the feet are not stable or the core pelvic floor diaphragm is not stable. Okay, so we need to understand what is happening in our core to then optimize the movement coordination in our clients. So very briefly going into this, as this is intended to kind of intrigue or maybe remind if some of you are BTS certified on how to use this information. So our pelvic floor, which is the base of our muscle, the base of your pelvis, is an anti-gravity muscle. This means that it is postural. Anything that is anti-gravity is going to be postural. When you engage or you add tension to the pelvic floor, you should feel a lift or a lightening of pressure on the feet. Okay. And you can kind of play around with that. If you know how to engage the pelvic floor and you were to stand up right now and engage the pelvic floor, could you say that you actually feel less pressure under your feet? I definitely do when I do it. Okay. Now, your pelvic floor also has very broad fascial attachments. So let's go over a few of those. Your pelvic floor, which is divided into a front, a back, a right, a left, and a whole, right? The front of your pelvic floor myofascially blends into your TVA muscles, okay? Your posterior pelvic floor myofascially blends into the deep sacral fibers of your glute max. The posterior pelvic floor, which is your levator ani, actually blends into your deep rotators, so into your deep hip or laterally. Okay, so already we've got this anterior, we got a posterior, we got a lateral connection, and then the entire pelvic floor blends into your diaphragm superior. Okay, so you have the superior, lateral, anterior, posterior, very, very integrated. Okay, now the way that we want to try to find rhythm and harmony with our breath and our pelvic floor is through kind of these waves, these sinusoidal waves of pattern that when I inhale diaphragmatically or subdiaphragmatically into my belly, my diaphragm is going down. As my diaphragm goes down and I do a nice deep inhalation into my belly, I also want to direct breath down into the base of my pelvis. Your pelvic floor is not going to let go or shut off or relax, but you want to create this relaxation downward. And then when you exhale, your diaphragm is going to start to lift. And at the same time, your pelvic floor is going to start to lift, right? So when you inhale, both of them relax down. And then when you exhale, they both lift up. And you want to try to find this rhythm, okay? Now, if you don't find this rhythm between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor, you're going to lower your diaphragm, and then your pelvic floor is going to stay tight and restricted. One, that's going to limit the functionality of the diaphragm itself, but it also further reinforces this offline disconnected pelvic floor. So they need to be able to kind of find that rhythm. Now, the way that I like to teach pelvic floor identification, there's a couple different ways. I'm going to show you a way that is going to be a standing one. Now, you could do this, of course, seated. You could do it in on your back in a quadruped. I actually like to find the pelvic floor in a variety of gravitational positions. But I definitely do emphasize that the one that I do want to focus on is the one standing in gravity, because that's the one that's going to translate to how we walk. Okay. So if I could have everyone stand up, and you don't necessarily need to see what I'm doing because there's not really much that you would see happening anyway. Okay. But what I want to do is first start by getting into what our foot activation would be. Okay, the foot activation is going to be connecting into the foot's core, the intrinsic. So this is going to be taught through a forward lean. There's many different ways that I teach this. Of course, I teach it through short foot, but I'm going to introduce forward lean as a great way to connect to our foot core. All right, so you're going to stand with your feet shoulder width apart. Your knees are slightly bent. Start by finding your foot tripod. So go underneath your first metatarsal, your fifth metatarsal, your heel. I'm lifting my toes up. I'm going to spread my toes nice and wide, and then I'm going to place the toes back down onto the floor. Staying in this position of a tripod with my digits long, straight, and flat, and my knees slightly bent, I'm now going to imagine that I'm stiff as a board. I'm going to rotate to the side so you can see this. And if you've done this before, again, just humor me. So we're here. We're going to rock our body forward. So I'm leaning forward, and then I'm coming back to a standing position. So I'm just going to gently rock forward and then come back. As soon as I do that, as soon as I start to lean my body forward, I feel my digits pushing down, and technically I feel my core engaged, or my TVA. My digits are going down, and then I release. So I will actually have my patients, when they're starting to kind of warm up for the exercises I might give them, we're going to do this in a very wave-like pattern. Your exhale is going to be when you're out. It's going to seem kind of counterintuitive. Exhale when you go out. Inhale when you come in, relax your feet. Exhale when you go out, toes go down. Inhale when you come back, relax your feet. Okay, that is the forward lean to start to get into this. Okay. And I am a little camera on the corner. If you do not have the camera shown, then you need to open that up. Okay, but I am here. My camera is open, so you should be able to see me. Okay, but again, the shares are primary because you really wouldn't need to see me because I'm talking through this. Okay, now we're going to stand shoulder width apart. We understand how your toes push down. So that action of a forward lean with the toes pushing down, you should be able to then push your toes down just like the forward lean, but don't do the forward lean. Okay, that's going to be the toe action down. Just remember that. Okay, let's get into our pelvic floor identification. If you cannot see me and you cannot understand how to get the camera to see me, don't worry, just listen to my words. Okay, we are standing with our feet shoulder width apart. Our knees are slightly bent. Our rib cage and our pelvis is stacked. Your hands are going to be by the side if you feel comfortable, or you could put them on your hips so you can feel just inside your ASIS. We're going to start by activating the anterior pelvic floor. We're going to do that technique, and then we're going to relax that. We're going to focus on the posterior pelvic floor. Then we're going to relax that, and then we're going to alternate anterior posterior, and then we're going to do both at the same time. Okay. For the anterior pelvic floor, you are going to do a Kegel. So you are going to either lift the anterior pelvic floor or stop your P. That would be the cue. Okay. I'm going to shut my eyes because it actually helps me to connect to my pelvic floor. So when I stand here in this position, I'm going to imagine stopping my P and then relaxing. Engage the anterior and then relax. Engage the anterior and relax. Okay, do it again. Keep doing it. Engage and relax. Now, every time you do that, do you feel that there is a lift, right? Lift and then relax. Lift and then relax. So you should feel that. Also, if you were to do that, stop your P and release. Do you feel something here where your TVA is? Do you feel something, right? Like a little extension, a little fascial tension, a little, right? Something right there. That's what you want to connect to. Okay, now we're going to relax the front and we're going to focus on the back. Okay, so same position. For your posterior pelvic floor, the focus or the cue is going to be either lift your posterior pelvic floor or stop your poo is going to be the sensation or the thought. Okay, so again, I'm going to shut my eyes because it helps me to connect. I'm going to lift my posterior pelvic floor and then release. Lift and release. Stop your poo and release. Keep doing that. Lift and release. So again, same thing. Every time you engage it, you should feel a lift. Beautiful, right? When you engage your posterior pelvic floor, do you feel anything happening in your backside, like a little, again, fasciculation or something? That's where you should, hopefully, okay, be feeling that connection. So now stay back where you are, please. Eyes could be shut if you would like. Knees are slightly bent. What we're going to now do is we're going to try to combine them. Now, the amount of strength that I want you to focus on is going to be 20%. So we are saying hello. This is not a maximum contraction. Okay, so I'm here. I'm going to engage my anterior, lift, hold, lift the back, hold, release both. Lift the front, lift the back, relax both. Lift the front, lift the back, relax both. Front, back, relax. front, back, relax. Front, back, relax. Okay. Can you now lift both at the exact same time, both the front and the back at the exact same time? Again, I'm going to shut my eyes. Here we go. Both release, both release, both release, both release. Now keep doing that. Every time you do that, can you start to push your toes down, release, toes down, release, toes down, just like that forward lean, toes down, release, toes down, release. Now, every time you lift the pelvic floor and you push your toes down, I want you to exhale, release. Shh, 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 shh. Perfect. Great. Okay. What you should be feeling is integration. Okay. Stacking. What we were doing through that pelvic floor identification and activation, standing in gravity, and ultimately connecting it to our feet and to our breath was really connecting that deep front line. Okay. That deep front line. Now, if you want to start to incorporate diaphragmatic breathing, that would be having them inhale and then inhale into the belly. And then as you exhale, you would start to do lift the front, lift the back, push your toes down, keep exhaling, release, inhale, inhale through the nose, feel the belly rise, belly rise. And as you start to exhale, belly starts to fall, lift the anterior, lift the posterior, keep exhaling, push your toes down, hold, exhaling, and release, inhale, belly rise, right? So that's how you're doing it. That wave. So the diaphragmatic breathing would be now you're cueing the breath as well in a little bit more focused way. Okay. Now, where you can start to take breathing outside of this exteroceptive connection and the stabilization and the fascia so that we are mechanically stable could be interoceptively. So now on the interoceptive side of things, this is how we connect to our internal environment, how we feel safe or not safe. Really, it is a majority of those interoceptors, visceral gut nerves, that are giving us this sensation of, does my internal environment feel balanced from a homeostatic perspective, or does it feel off? As soon as my internal environment, kind of the Richter scale, like a thermostat, starts to shift in any direction and I don't feel balanced based off of what I consider balance, it throws me into a fight or flight response. Okay. That is then represented through our breath patterns. Okay. So there is this subconscious influence of our breathing patterns. And I often say that you just can't tell someone to breathe the right way. So if you notice that they're having very anxious breathing, right? And then you could say, okay, focus on this, breathe into your belly, do Buddha breathing, all those things. As soon as someone starts to become subconscious, they're going to shift into a survival-based breathing pattern, which is typically more supradiaphragmatic and accessory-based, okay? So this concept of survival, safety, and breathing patterns is important to your clients and how they move and creating movement correction, because if they don't feel safe, they're never going to breathe the right way, okay? So this is an important concept that I like to go into, and it connects to your interoception and your interoceptors. Okay. So again, interoception is defined as the sense of the internal state of the body. Now, what happens is that you have this sensation, butterflies in the stomach. You and there are then going to interpret, this is all happening subconsciously. You're going to interpret what those butterflies mean, and then you're going to put an emotion to it. Easy example, you are about to give a speech in public to a room of 1,000 people. You're nervous. You're starting to feel those butterflies. You're putting, you sense it. You're going to put an emotion to it, and you have fear associated to it. So now you're having a fear response, right? Your palms are getting sweaty. You're starting to, like, your mouth is getting dry, right? You have to keep going to the bathroom, like all these responses, right? These are all subconscious responses of your autonomic nervous system. And it was based off of initially the sensation, that interoceptive sensation. Okay. Now we want to understand everyone's emotion they tack onto a sensation is different and unique. Okay. Now where we find interoceptors is on our fascia. So the same tissue that stored our connective tissue and connects our feet to our core, your fascia is also where we find all of those interoceptors. And instead of your fascia just being an extension of your brain from a sensory perspective and a movement application, your fascia, which is packed with interoceptors, can be referred to as the organ of consciousness. This is where we house emotion, is within our fascia. Now, what's interesting is that 80% of the nerves, excuse me, 80% of the sensory nerves in our fascia are free nerves. Just kind of take that, so majority of them. 90% of those free nerves are interoceptive, which means from a ratio perspective, for every one nerve that is found in your fascia that is proprioceptive, you have 7 that are interoceptive or emotional. Okay, so that's where you could actually argue that your fascia is emotion. It's actually much more emotion-based. This also means that when we move, we can influence our fascia, which means ultimately we influence our emotion. Okay, you have this capacity to influence someone's emotional state by just getting them moving, right? By stimulating their fascia, which is awesome. So how we assess interoception, one of the most common ways that you can assess someone's connection to themselves interoceptively, you could call it interoceptive awareness or interoceptive perception, right? Mind-body connection, right? How do your clients gauge on that is through what's called heartbeat tracking. Now, the way that heartbeat tracking works is that you would sit in your chair or lie on your back, and you would be sitting with your palms facing up, feet flat on the floor, eyes are shut, or you could be on your back in Savasana with your palms facing up and you're relaxed and your eyes are shut. And you're going to just start to sense your heartbeat. As soon as you start to sense your heartbeat, you are actually going to count the number of beats that you feel or sense in 15 seconds. After that, you're going to take your hand and you're going to go to your radial pulse, right? So just keep it down on wherever you are, and you're going to find your actual pulse. And you're going to count that for 15 seconds. And then you're going to compare them. Okay. So we're going to run through this. I'm going to be looking at my timer, so I'm not going to be doing it with you. I'm going to kind of be talking you through it. So I'm going to have you find your position. Palms are facing up, eyes are shut. And I'm going to stop talking in a second. And you are going to do your sensing of your heartbeat, sensing of the heartbeat for 15 seconds. I'm going to tell you when to start, and I'm going to have you just start to feel it. And start. Stop. Okay, let's do one more. So one more time, just sensing, 15 seconds. Count how many beats you feel. Get yourself ready and start. And stop. Great. So now you're going to take one hand over to your radial pulse, stay in that exact same position, feet flat on the floor, you're on your back. Start to find your actual pulse. Get ready to count your actual pulse or heartbeat. 15 seconds, starting now. and stop. Great. Okay. So you got your number of heartbeats that you sensed and the number of heartbeats that you felt, both within 15 seconds. So let's say I sensed 12 and my actual pulse was 14 within that 15 seconds. I'm just making this up. Okay. Take 12 divided by 14, find what your accuracy is, or whatever your numbers are, divide your numbers, find your accuracy. When you look at the research, they then say that if you have an accuracy of 80% or higher, you would be considered as high interoceptively connected. If you are 60% or lower, you would have a low interoceptive connection. Okay. Now, how you use this, the high interoceptive connection could be someone who they love Pilates and yoga and meditation. They were an athlete. They can very much connect to their physical body, easy for them to connect to their breath. So those are kind of some of those characteristics. The one that is low interoceptively connected may not be aware of their emotional state. They don't understand if they're getting irritated. They're very disconnected. So those are some of that characteristics. Okay. Now at EBFA, we actually have a course called the Interoception Performance Specialist. Interoception Performance Specialist is all about this, right? So understanding interoception, emotion. We also have another course called the Neurosensory Specialist. We are actually teaching that next weekend live via Zoom. You can go to naboso.com or ebfaglobal.com to sign up for that. And that's also recorded. In those courses, we go into a little bit more on these concepts, okay? But safety is sensory. So if you are trying to do something to connect someone to their body, their interoception, themselves, diaphragmatic breathing is a great way to do that. We want to bring in sensory exteroception with interoception to help control and connect even more. So we call this sensory-based breathing. You could do this barefoot on a Naboso mat. Hands are on the chest. You can feel the weight of the hands. You could have someone with like a blanket on them to put a little bit of pressure so they're connecting. You are using audible exhalation so they can hear it and feel the vibration, right? Really contract your muscles tight and then relax your muscles. So that's waking up the proprioceptors. So those are sensory-based breathing techniques to connect exteroception to interoception, okay? And that's really what we're trying to do, is connect exteroception with interoception, okay? This is a little bit longer, so just kind of hang with me for a little bit, okay? When we look at how we are going to break down the processing then, the simplest way to look at processing of sensory stimulation is by understanding the three main divisions of the brain. Now, this triune brain theory of brainstem, limbic system, neocortex is ultimately understanding that sensory stimulation has to get to the neocortex. It has to first go through each of these divisions to ultimately get to the neocortex. So from the reptilian brain, which is very survival based, it ultimately has to get to the limbic system and then ultimately to the neocortex. Okay. So just understand there are these three parts. The reptilian brain is safety based. It's autonomic nervous system based. If the client doesn't feel safe, they will not bypass and go into the limbic system and ultimately the neocortex. So that's where this is important. Again, this is heavily covered in the neurosensory specialists that we do. Your autonomic nervous system is actually found within your brainstem. You also found your reticular activating system within your brainstem. And your RAS is going to be the ignition and turns on the brain. So in order to process sensory stimulation, the brain needs to be activated and turned on. That is a brainstem function. That is your reticular activating system. And it is activated through doing eye movements, vestibular movements, or bringing your tongue to your palate. Those are 3 ways to kind of activate and get the brain ready for processing sensory stimulation and movement. Your limbic system, which is division number 2, this is going to be emotion. Additional stress responses are found here. Eye movements are controlled here. This is how you can break it down even further. Thalamus, hypothalamus, basal ganglia, amygdala, hippocampus. Again, running through this quickly, but we go into this in other courses. Limbic system is going to further dictate the ability to process that sensory stimulation. It specifically is through the thalamus. Okay. Now there's part of your limbic system that controls movement, and that is the basal ganglia. So the basal ganglia does eye movement control, which influences large motor movements. Okay, so that's what you can kind of see there. I'm going to skip through this because we went over this in our sensory-based balance training webinar that we did on Monday. So sensory-based balance training, everyone is going to get access to that as well. It's on our YouTube, but that's where you can see that in that course. Okay. Neocortex, this is going to be ultimately where you need that sensory stimulation to be processed, right? So we got to get into command central, where we find our somatosensory cortex. This is where everything is processed to ultimately control movement. Okay. Now, again, in order to get through the brain stem, to the limbic system, to the neocortex, you have to feel safe, which is your autonomic nervous system, which is represented through your breath and your interoception. I hope that that is connecting for everyone. Okay, connecting for everyone. Your autonomic nervous system is going to be kind of this back and forth between sympathetic and parasympathetic. Are we going from acceleration, which is sympathetic, your fight or flight response, or are we pushing on the brakes, which is the slowing down, and your parasympathetic system? We go back and forth between that. From our breath, anything that is supradiaphragmatic is sympathetic. Anything that is subdiaphragmatic, belly breathing, is going to be parasympathetic. Parasympathetic is slowing down. It is stabilization. It is how we want to connect between our diaphragm, our pelvic floor, and our feet. Okay. Now, the one that's actually in control of our system is going to be your parasympathetic state. Your parasympathetic state controls how you regulate between that autonomic nervous system. And that's because it is primarily based off of your vagus nerve. So when you are training and strengthening the vagus nerve, which connects to your diaphragm, this all connects to your diaphragm, okay, you are then essentially strengthening your parasympathetic response. Okay, that is referred to as vagal tone. So by increasing vagal tone, you are increasing the emotional flexibility of the individual. And it is essentially saying that they have a very strong, healthy, responsive parasympathetic system. They can downregulate their emotional state or their autonomic state very quickly and reset to a baseline because they have high vagal tone. Okay, these are some ways to strengthen and improve your vagal tone. They stimulate the vagus nerve. Again, we go into these in our other courses, but you always want to be thinking about strong, healthy vagal nerve or vagus nerve to ensure safety in your clients and in your individuals. Okay, so from a brain, breath, barefoot perspective, brain is the processing of the information. I know I went through that very quickly. I do apologize just from the sake of time. We just had to be a little bit faster on there. Okay, brain is processing. Breath is the representation of interoceptive, and that connects to autonomic. Barefoot represents exteroceptive, which is proprioceptive and mechanoceptive, and is represented to how we move. So we really want to try to be interweaving and understanding this interconnection between processing, exteroceptive, interoceptive, and then you have this human being. Okay. I hope that that connected. If you are wanting to learn more, this is of course intended to guide you into the different courses that we do through EBFA and start to pique a curiosity and to understand our products at Naboso. So these are the different courses at EBFA Global. This is our website. The Interoceptive Performance Specialist, a very great course. New one that we just created and launched this year is Neurosensory Specialist. That is going to be, again, next weekend. It is recorded. And then, of course, we have our BTS level 1 and level 2. There should be a 1 in front of that as well. Okay. If you have any questions, please type those in. Please do type those in. Okay. So first question, does this training assist the client with Parkinson's? Absolutely. 1000%. 1000%. You need to be able to understand both exteroceptive, interoception, brain processing, Naboso, neurosensory stimulation. All of this is so connected to Parkinson's. So definitely, please do check out that stuff if you work with Parkinson's patients. If you are not familiar with Carl of Parkinson's regeneration training, do check him out in his work. He works with Naboso a lot. He used to teach for EBFA. He has a great course that is very much focused on sensory stimulation. Okay. See, Sebastian is enjoying the webinars. That's fabulous. Robert, you're welcome. You're welcome. Great content. Okay, great. Wow, everyone processed this so well. So there are not that many questions. Actually, Robert has a question. This is going to be my last question that I answer. And then I am going to wrap it up and make sure everyone gets the recording. 1 second, I'm just sending this. Carl Sterling for everyone. And it is Parkinson's regeneration training. If I spelled that wrong, I do apologize, but it gets you the information. Robert says, how would loud music impact the entire experience of brain, breath, and barefoot? Loud music in a negative way can trigger a defense response. In the neurosensory course, we go into this. If it is a type that triggers a sympathetic response because of perhaps more bass, or some people are auditorily sensitive or defensive, it can then trigger a defense response. If it doesn't do that, then not loud music, but music in general is very powerful to how we connect to our body and movement, because audition and rhythm and a certain beats per minute is actually very important to how we connect to movement. So the right type of music at the right BPM and the purpose behind it, powerful. Loud music that triggers a defense response, not good. Okay. And then Sandy says, I'm a layperson. My son has Charcot-Marie tooth, or Charcot-Marie type 2, peripheral neuropathy, progressive. Would this help to treat that using Naboso? Yes. So Sandy, who has a son with CMT, in a lot of my courses, especially the neurosensory and just Naboso in general, I often speak a lot about how I use Naboso, barefoot, sensory, vibration platforms, compression, wrist weights, visual training for people with CMT, which for the listeners, that is a type of peripheral sensory / motor neuropathy. A lot of neuropathies that we might encounter in our clients and our patients is actually purely sensory based. CMT is actually a combination, and the motor neuropathy part of it is very impacting from a balance, gait, stabilization perspective. So then you definitely want to be looking at ways to stimulate the peripheral system sensory to try to create that control. Totally message me offline if you want, Sandy, through the Naboso page, if you would like. Okay. I will just answer this. I'm actually going to stop the recording, then Marilee, I'm going to answer yours, but off of the recording. Okay. So thank you all so much. Please do check out the other courses. We are going to send out the recording. And just as a FYI teaser, if you're happening to be listening to this live, next week, we actually have, I think it's next week, next Monday, we have a mechanoception, foot perception, neuropathy. Oh, so Sandy, you would love this one. It is a neuropathy focused webinar. So the entire thing is focused on neuropathy. So do look for the sign up on that. That will be sent out via email. Okay. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to stop the recording. I will still be online because Marilee, I'm going to answer your questions.